So do I have a mixed audience here? I think I've got some people from DWP, from people from manufacturing and financial services as well, or mainly industry? Any financial services? 2 financial services as well. Okay. So I'm going to cover, I mean there's commonalities, but I'm going to put in a bit about financial services, but what I cover is also for manufacturing. And I'm going to try and make it interactive, because I've noticed some of the sessions today, this afternoon, have been, people I think have been struggling to follow in that sense. It's a separate conversation. It's all right, no problem. So let me start off in terms of, and by the way, apparently if you feed any answers back, you'll have to put your hands up and tell me, because I'm going to ask you some questions. You've got to use a mic. The AV team have told me. So how many of you have seen this report? Because I've got a very ambitious aim this afternoon, especially this late in the afternoon, and I'm going to challenge each of you at the end of this session to say that you've taken one thing away from my talk. Otherwise, why did I bother? So I will ask one of you, it might be you, Mike, it might be you, Constantina. Hopefully you've got some kind of added value thing, by the way, from the session. So I'm just putting you on notice, partly to keep you awake and keep your attention and engagement. I hope you won't mind me doing that. But to start off, anybody aware of the BCI Supply Chain Resiliency Survey? It's only been running for 10 years.
I'm aware of it. I haven't read this one.
Oh, you've read some of them. Thank you very much.
It's been
A long time ago. Long time ago. Good stuff. Sorry, so I feel like a TV host now with going around with the mic. Yeah, it's the 10th year, okay? And why should we even bother to look at it? For those of you who care about supply chain risk, it's got statistics on failure, and it covers financial services and manufacturing. What do you think was the level of disruptions reported? Over 500 companies or other organisations reported this year? What kind of statistic do you think? Come on. So this is ITV, the best answer maybe gets one night out with me. Something like that. Does anybody know? Get us a guess.
20%?
Higher?
60%?
Nearly. 56. It has been 60. So I'll come on to that. 56% of organisations are saying they've had a significant disruption in the last 12 months. And it started at this level. When I first did this with BCI, by the way, I'm the guy who wrote many of the questions with the BCI 10 years ago. We kept running it. We changed it a bit over the 10 years. If they came back with a number after they convinced me to join up with them, I headed up Zurich's business at the time in this area. If they come back with 20% as an insurer, I would have said, that's pretty scary and somebody should do something about that. I honestly nearly fell off my chair back then when I saw that kind of level of disruption from these respondents. I appreciate, although we get 500 respondents, probably the ones that have got the bigger issue respond. So I'm not saying it isn't, but there's a lot of companies out there responding. And look at this in terms of top management support, which is why I'm going to talk a bit about the business case later. Still only a third of organisations have got top business support, which I think is, shows we've all got a challenge in this room, doesn't it, in terms of tackling supply chain resilience. Do you know what this 52% at tier 1 means? Anybody want to guess what that means? About half the disruption. Some people over here have got folded arms, so I'm not sure about the body language, but only half the disruptions are with your direct suppliers. And many organisations, insofar as they're doing supply chain resilience, are only looking at their direct suppliers. So half of your problems are below that level, is what that says, and there's some detail on that. And only 20% of organisations are using any kind of technology. I find that quite scary in itself. And by the way, I started off with some of our methods and frameworks we built 10 years ago. We didn't have much technology then. By the way, what's the most popular piece of technology being used? And the prize, anybody want to guess at the back there? It's not a tricky question.
Telephone.
No, I'm sure that's about a piece of software. It's not MetricStream, by the way. Yes, Excel. Bill Gates is a very happy man. Now, I know I've got geniuses in the audience because you obviously turned up to this session this afternoon. But can you think of how you would manage, say, 50 different risk factors around a supplier? There probably maybe that many you need to look at, maybe a few less. And when you're dealing with 100 or 200 strategic suppliers, let alone how do you do that in an Excel spreadsheet and keep it up to date real time? But that's where technology is going. So, top causes of disruption. And I know there's a lot of discussion on cyber, and it's true, cyber and IT outages come up the charts. They were there in 2009, 10, but they're much more serious now. Interesting about loss of talent and skills and transport network you'd expect in manufacturing. So this is across the whole sector. In the report, it breaks it down by region and industry sector. And if you come and see me, I'll give you a link to the free site afterwards. So there's a lot more in the report. As I say, if nothing else, if you're trying to go to your boss or somebody in your organisation to make a business case, then this could be good outside information. It costs you nothing. So, by the way, in this presentation, I'm going to take you through some of the approaches now to managing risk from a financial services and a broader perspective. And then I hope I was going to bring in some technology types of tools that are out there that you might want to consider as an organisation. Does that sound okay? Okay. For those in financial services, you'll be familiar with the discussion paper on operational risk. Yes, I think at the back, good nods there. And it talks about, it gets into, particularly into supply chain. So if nothing else, the pressure on the financial services sector around third parties and concentration risk, and I'll come on to that more in a moment, having talked about the different tiers, is on the agenda of the regulator. Quite rightly, in my opinion, given the kind of statistics. And, I've been in this area, I didn't go through my CV, did I? It's in the pack anyway. It gets quite boring, but I have been focused on supply chain risk for 10 years. And I think it was Alan I spoke to earlier, so apologies for repeating the story. But when I first started in this area in 2010 and gave talks like this, I want you to picture me with much longer grey hair and maybe white robes and sandals, because that's what it felt like walking into the room with senior execs or even risk people and talking about supply. Back in 2009-10, they thought I was some kind of crazy prophet of doom. But in 2011, with the Japanese tsunami and the Thailand floods, people suddenly in America, for example, saw their production lines in the automotive sector stop. Not because of anything that happened in America, but because they couldn't get ignition switches. Or even funnier, I'll tell you the funny story about that. Henry Ford, back in the 1930s, what did he say about the colour of the car that you could have in the 1930s? His Model T Ford. He said, exactly. Well done, Alan. You could be the mastermind today. What couldn't they supply the automotive industry after a certain plant in Sendai was destroyed in the tsunami for a number of months? Ford could not supply what colour car to you? Exactly. I told you a genius in this room. Isn't that ironic? Isn't the world cruel to us? So the Merck plant, that was the only plant in the world that made that type of pigment for black paint. Yep, exactly. Yep. So that's about multi-tier. Changing behaviours. The conference talked a lot about cyber issues, and that is that juxtaposition of cyber, because if you haven't got information flow, your supply chain stops as well, and that has caused a number of issues. I won't go over all the case studies there. And then this is all taken from that report, and it talks about here the business service, but this could equally be applied to the supply of cement or whatever. There's a process flow there. You're dependent upon a third party, their information technology and so on. And I believe the the outcomes and recommendation of financial services are coming out in the summer of next year. So within financial services, and watch this space, once it comes out in financial services, it'll get fed into other regulations, won't it, across Europe. So I'm afraid the need to improve supply chain resilience, if it wasn't there from a business perspective, which I think it is. This is where my daughter has told me off. I always check with my teenage daughter about the quality of my slides. I got this wrong, didn't I? But there's a deliberate message here when I do this, because there's far too many boxes on here, and for those of you who are visually challenged, I apologise at the back. But in terms of managing risk, and it came up, I did attend the other two supplier-related third-party talks today, and I know Duncan talked about being comprehensive. And this is a framework we came up with, I've refined it, but with Zurich many years ago when we introduced new policies to cover the whole of a risk of a supplier. So we're looking at, firstly, just talk you through some of these boxes, the industry risk. So let's say we take, I'll take an industry one, excavation tyres for mining equipment. The demand goes up dramatically and down with the mining industry. So you get real issues with that. And if you can't get your tyres for your excavation equipment, you don't get anything out of the mine. So what you do if you're looking at that is you'd say, I know that mining company's got one supplier that it's using, but are there any other suppliers and where are they? So what does the industry structure look like? Looking for that black pigment paint manufacturer, is there only one source in the whole world for that key piece of equipment? Yeah? So that's what you're trying to do there, analyse. And your procurement team, if they're running a proper category strategy, should be able to show you that if you're in the risk team, to say, yeah, we looked at the market and we're aware there's some other suppliers, this is where they are. What we're looking for there, in particular, is concentration of risk. So, for example, in the case of hard disk drives, do people know that story? No? Good story. These case studies are good, by the way, to support your business case. So that's a story of Western Digital and Seagate, who had their two of the major manufacturers' hard disks, basically overnight in the Thailand floods. Somewhere between 20 and 40% of the worldwide capacity to make hard disks for laptops or PCs disappeared overnight. It impacted, you can check on the whole industry, so Dell, Intel, because nobody wanted Intel chips if they couldn't put the hard disk in as well, etc. So that's looking at that cluster risk. We also look at it from a third-party point of view. So this is now the production sites of, and so on, of the actual supplier using, the third party you're using. Do you know whether your organisation, because I said, oh, you want to take you one thing away with you, how many of your organisations do you think check their critical suppliers, I'm not asking you to check them all, but for where their production sites or data centres are, in terms of Nat Cat exposure? Any thoughts? So floods, quake risk. It's all, it's available free on the internet at a start, and then if you're worried, you can get more detailed studies done. Don't you think it'd be a good check to do? Believe me, I still ask my you don't think it's a good check to do, or you do think it's a good check?
I don't think so.
You're not sure that they're doing it? Okay, yeah. I know I still ask my procurement colleagues, I am out of procurement, whether they're doing it. And it amazes me, most of them still don't do it. Some are doing it now. I'd say it's about 20% of companies. Why wouldn't you do this? This is your profitability or key service to, thinking about DWP and paying out, if there's flooding in the UK is quite common. If one of your key data centres or service centres is flooded, it's a problem. Lots of people do financial, so as I say, I'm not going to go through every one of these boxes. Lots of companies do financial appraisal and look at the structure. But as we know, regulatory issues we've already talked about in the financial services, how is that embedded in? Commercial contracts is fine, perhaps business continuity plans. Are they tested? I know within MetricStream there's a whole module on business continuity, but that I find typically, and I was guilty of this, by the way, I'm a poacher and now I'm a gamekeeper. I'm all bright now, but I took lots of risks I shouldn't have taken because, by the way, your procurement team, probably still today, are motivated by the bonuses they receive or salary rises. It's true, because I think we all are psychologically. Yeah? And that is on cost savings, isn't it? Well, that's the main measure. So when you come and talk to them about risk, it's not their fault. They say, oh, sorry, I'll get round to talking to you, Constantina, in 2021. I've just got a few things to do. Yeah? I heard a number of people talking around third-party relationships, and I agree that's important. Where do you, for example, sit in the priorities of your suppliers? Because you will have prioritised your supply chain and said these are our top 20 suppliers. But how do they view you as a customer? Just be realistic. I'll embarrass my former employer because I always use this example. So Zurich Insurance used a lot of IBM software and services, and I'm sure IBM, they were definitely a strategic supplier to Zurich. If IBM went away, we would have had significant issues. But do you think IBM, if they had a real issue with their services in the cloud, would they serve Zurich, massive company, lots of revenue, but or one of the major clearing banks or trading houses like Deutsche Bank or whoever else? I suspect we might have been, although the CEO would tell us your top priority, we'd be number 2. And where would you sit in your industry, the DWP or whatever it might be? If they're serving a major bank, maybe it's worth knowing, are you the preferred customer? Of course, they'll all tell you are, but you can do certain things. Do you really believe what they're telling you? And does it make sense? Hopefully, is this useful? I'm not going to go through every box, but does that give you an idea? I can take those offline. But it's having a comprehensive risk approach. Then, sorry, and I have put it in red here, the dreaded word, I tried to hide it here, Brexit is up there. But there are many reasons. I already talked to you, didn't I, about the fact that your supply chains are all multi-tiered in some way. If you're using data centres, those data centres get their kit from somewhere, or they buy in other services, or they depend on infrastructure, electricity. For critical supply chains, because I'm also conscious, if you do this for all your suppliers from a disruption point of view, you haven't got the resources to do it. So this is a journey of improvement. Maybe you start with the top 20 suppliers. How do you think you should measure whether a supplier's important to you from a disruption point of view? I'm telling you this because I know procurement will probably give you a different answer, because I would have done 20 years ago, and it was the wrong answer. Even though I'm an accountant, I'm ashamed to admit it. I'll tell you the answer then. Procurement probably will produce a list and say, these are the companies we spend the most money with, the top 20. Yeah? And they go down the list. Wrong answer. Wrong answer. Look at the ones that have the biggest impact on your business performance, your key service, maybe if you're in financial services, what's your most profitable product? Who are the suppliers behind that? Or if you're in cement manufacturing or whatever, what's your most profitable line of business? Which suppliers do you depend upon? And the products that they send you. That's where you start your journey. So you may only start with, Apple spend billions, by the way, on supply chain resilience. I saw in the other talk. I won't ask you this question because he answered it. They outsource everything. Their supply chain, and that's increased. A lot of companies do that. But it should be measured in terms of impact on your profitability or your service. DWP's most important service. I think you've got to keep up. Understand those suppliers first, because I say you can't do everything in one go. But there's an awful lot of reasons why, even if you're UK based, you should be thinking about where are those key supplies coming from. Because as we already said, a lot of you might have visibility here, a good visibility at tier 1, less visibility at tier 2 if you've got any visibility at the moment. And just to prove how important this is, the automotive sector post 2011 have spent a lot of money, I've no idea how much, in digging down and discovering their supply chain because of things like black pigment. They then had an explosion at a factory in Germany, just one part Evonik, that again caused a disruption across the whole industry. So they are busy. They've got tier 1 mapped out, no problem. They've got most of tier 2. They're working back through the key supply chains they're working. They haven't got all the answers yet, but they're on that journey of improvement because they've got the backing of the board. And by the way, one other little tip as I'm going through here, you can get cost savings through your insurance program if you start to monitor some of this. Your insurance risk manager is probably paying for certain covers that if you can prove that you're managing it better, you potentially could get premium reductions. I'll come on to that in a moment. I wanted to bring this out as well, black box thinking. Have any of you read a book by Matthew Said? I'm not on commission to him, by the way. It's a good read if you're in governance, risk and compliance. He talks about black box thinking, and this is a contrast between, we're a culture where it encourages transparency, and I heard other speakers talk about that for near misses. Have you got that culture whereby risk is, openly discussed in the first line and so on? Learning no blame mentality, so you can build in resilience. He contrasted it, by the way, between airlines and the medical profession in the UK at least, where it's more, we haven't made a mistake and people's lives are lost or have been lost. They're trying to change that culture because of a lack of transparency. Making the business case. I put up some headings here. I'm happy, by the way, to discuss offline if you want. I developed a number of business cases around supply chain resilience, but these are some of the drivers you can look at. I'll come on to staff cost savings. I suspect your procurement team at the moment are spending little bits of time trying to do supply chain resilience. So maybe running Google alerts on their suppliers or whatever. So it's good they're doing that work, but it isn't in a framework. So you've got them spending 10% of their time, whereas if you brought in a more efficient technology-based solution, which I'll talk about, or the type of solutions you've got there, then it could save their time. Obviously, you've got the lost profit and revenue, and that, as we've said in recent examples, has been tens of millions, hundreds, even billions. The reduced material premiums, just to illustrate that, I remember talking maybe 8 years ago now to one of the big logistics providers, to a big automotive player in the UK. And they said, Nick, you're absolutely right. They had a business case that justified shipping some of this production to China on the basis that 80% of it would be sea freighted. Because they have so many issues in China, little issues with their supply chain, they end up air freighting it, so they're only sea freighting 50%. So the whole case, but they hide it in variances because they're not they want to just hide, oh dear, we're not quite hitting our numbers on that. So we'll put it through material variances. So you can look at that side, the difference between sea freight. Market share and brand value. I've talked about insurance premiums, freight costs, again, if you reduce that, and then the regulatory challenges. So these are things you might want to bring into your resilience case. And I have to admit, Bill Gates would be proud. I've got a little Excel model that does this. Apologies, I haven't got any more sophisticated, but just give you some headings that you can put in a business case if you're struggling with that. I think I'm going to skip over this to a certain extent. You recognise the challenges, but it's important if you're moving supply chain resilience forward that you embed it in your sourcing and procurement process. So work with your procurement team. Yeah, it should be one process for the company. Yeah. Do you think you've got it embedded? I don't know, at the DWP yet or whatever, Mike? Or
No, we haven't. It's not just procurement, No, we haven't. But it's probably not just procurement. It's probably legality as well. Because we've got lots of legal obligations as well. So I think we'd probably say it as being the supply chain with procurement and legal. And that's the work that we now know that we need to do going forward.
Yeah. So. Yeah, that's a very good point. I think that's why I urged, I hope I got this message across, top management support. It's come up a lot in GRC anyway, in general, because without that, if you can't link up the silos, I call them silos in organisations, you get this kind of silo effect that at its extreme, for example, and I've experienced this, where the finance director in a company I work for was extending payment terms to all suppliers. And then one of our key suppliers said, if you do this, we're not supplying you anymore. And it was for one of our most profitable products. Yeah, and he was just kind of, oh, I can do this because we're a big player. No, you can't. And then, he rapidly reversed his decision. So it's about being joined up. So aligning people, key KPIs, making sure your KPIs around supply chain resilience actually link into the business objectives, and preferably, I haven't put it up on that slide actually, the executives bonus scheme. It's always good to understand what your executives are being bonused on, which is probably performance of some sort, and if you can relate supply chain resilience to that, that's good. I heard, and it's very important, you could probably lecture me on this, which the racy kind of network has come up a few times at the conference already, and I think that's important in terms of supply chain disruption as well. Otherwise, you've got the procurement director blaming the compliance and risk teams for the problems, or it's a risk in the insurance manager, why didn't he just buy insurance for it? By the way, you can only buy insurance for a number of specific perils anyway, it's quite limited. Valuable, I'm not knocking it, but only in a certain area. And then the other point is, if you aren't giving out training to your procurement team around resilience, data protection, some of the things they should be asking for and frameworks, you get the result you ask for, don't you? If they don't understand what they should be putting into that process, you get problems. So, I'm now going to move into some of the, any questions on the kind of background steps that you need to put in place? Does it make sense? You're comfortable with what you need to do now? So now I'm going to talk to you about some of the exciting developments in the technologies going along. There's a significant move out there in industry to bring in unstructured data. You've got lots of structured data, haven't you, and data lakes and things like that to pull together. But in terms of understanding and getting into predictive action insights, actionable insights, and I got that word, by the way, I've heard insights used a lot in this conference, but I remember this customer now maybe 5 years ago said to me, Nick, what I'm interested in is actionable risk, actionable insights. I want to be able to do something about it. It's no good producing nice data reports unless I can do something with it. He was in the food industry. By the way, one thing we found there, talking about the network, was his suppliers were reasonably well spread in this division in Asia. But guess what the single point of failure was there? 80% of the profitability of that division went through the port in Thailand. So if Thailand port shut down, and we'd mapped out the key supply chains to the UK, it's a UK food group. In a particular commodities, you can guess what they are if they're coming from Thailand, Cambodia and so on. But I won't say any more because I might give the company name away. But yeah, so mapping out. But unstructured data and getting to predictive analytics. Isn't it useful to know about things before they happen? So I'll give you a story on that one from last year's hurricane. And this is public domain, a company called Biogen, who have a bit of software I'm going to talk about similar to this. They could see that the Hurricane Maria was coming towards Puerto Rico. They realised, because they'd mapped out their suppliers, there was particular bags that they put their commodity in to supply to their patients. So they were able to ship out as much product as possible before the hurricane struck, to also start, before they even had their facilities, or their supplier facilities hit, to look at alternative suppliers. So they were steps ahead. This is like predictive analytics. Hurricane hadn't hit, but they could see it was on its way. They were taking action because they already knew their dependency, and I'll come on to that in a moment. And this morning, actually, Duncan spoke about the inadequacies of machine learning and algorithms on data analytics and looking at events out there specific to your supplier. So what we're saying is if you know of, say, 50 key locations for your critical suppliers and your facilities, you can feed them into this and what you're getting from those locations into something like this. taking millions of news feeds. I've actually put the supplier name up here. There's other suppliers like this, but I just want to show you where the technology's got to if you weren't aware of it. So taking all these millions of news feeds and then using NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, that's quite a mouthful by the way to say, they're ending up with only around 4 alerts per day because they've refined down. What I will say, and I said to Duncan, is there is human elements into this still, so they're improving it. But I've also heard from a big telco company that are using similar technology from another supplier, that now the procurement director, she was saying she relies when she gets a challenge from a directorial board that this is feeding through, you know. So he'll say, are we impacted by this earthquake or river, you know, the flood near our facility out there? She'll say, no, I haven't been informed. I'm confident the third party told me. So nowadays you can get, I would have loved this, you know, 10 years ago when I ran a procurement team, because we were doing the kind of Google searches or trying to read the newspapers or trying to fit it together. This is feeding it tailored to your desktop. And what's more than that, of course, everybody seems to, just like my daughters, I wish we'd get them off the apps, but they're always on the apps, but there's an app for this now. And this is not uncommon in the industry, so there's more than one supplier that's doing this. But it might be useful for your procurement team to know, because we know the adoption by procurement or risk people is very low. But wouldn't you want this kind of time saving and so on? And then the next thing, and if any of you, how many of you are fascinated by Chinese pollution challenges and production shutdowns? I thought not, so you don't need to watch my webinar, but I did do a webinar. But the important on that for Resilink, this company. But I don't know, I think we've had about 3 viewings so far, despite, no, I'm slightly joking there. But the important thing I want to bring out in the software is scenario planning. I know in GRC you love scenario planning, don't you? So why aren't you doing, how many of you are doing scenario planning for your supply chains? I thought that would be the answer. 0. So shouldn't you be doing it for strategic suppliers? So again, the software is out there. So you map out the key production sites and you can highlight areas that might be impacted. They could be much smaller areas than that. They could be in a city if you're worried about the port, around terrorist alert or whatever. You can start to play out key scenarios. Of course, you're not going to do it for the whole supply chain or whatever, but you can also sit down with your supplier and talk about this. And the other thing that I'm pleased about, you know, when I looked at technology 8 years ago, the cost was kind of significant, let's put it that way, but the cost of buying into this software is coming down, so it's negligible. I think that event monitoring, I think it's $4 a year now or $4 a month per critical site. But I think all of you within here can think, well, that probably is, you know, we can get value out of that. And then also the capability of mapping out these multi-tier supply chains, I think, is important for your critical suppliers, whether it's in this network or whatever. And how many of you have heard of the expression diamonds of death? Ladies, it's just so I don't have to buy my wife any more diamonds. No, diamonds of death. Do you know what that means in a supply chain network situation? It means where people get false comfort from the fact that they say, oh, well, Nick, don't worry about our supply chain or our third party, because we've got 3 other backups that could make exactly the same part. Yeah, for our cement manufacturing machine or our thing. But then you dig into, well, oh, there's this widget in that machine, isn't there? Where does that come from? And you find out in the diamond of death. So there's you, 4 nice suppliers, you invested in that, it's critical, most critical product you have in your production. And oh, second tier, they all need this piece of, this widget, this piece of glass from the second tier, the diamond of death. Because you need to know about it, because then when if they're disruptive, they have a fire. And if you think yourself, I'll just embarrass the NHS, and I heard this from a consultant friend of mine at Watford General, he said, Nick, there's been a fire at just one factory in China that makes the API for this particular, you know, type of treatment, antiseptic treatment, that's the best, you know, the most best on the market at the moment. We can't get hold of it at the moment. You know, we're going down to our secondary choice of, I think it's an antibiotic. So just one incident. Also, we haven't talked about it much today, but you can start to build up risk scores. That's what I'll bring up here. So I know it's going to be a challenge. We talked about the impact, how we can measure the impact, but then of those suppliers, what is the most risky? So then it's about putting together the different metrics, be it around cyber risk, business continuity, financial health, getting a picture of where should you prioritise your efforts, bearing in mind that an improved business continuity plan may help you in a number of respects across a number of these risks and so on. But scoring, understanding who should be the priority suppliers from a risk point of view. It doesn't have to be perfect mathematics. It's just picking out, the red, the amber and the green. Does that make sense? And then I would urge you in any of your third-party optimization to think about all the different areas, compliance, reputation. Look at a solution that covers not just quality, cost and delivery, which is the common things, but the compliance risk, data security and so on, and being able to pick that up. And I noticed Duncan Jones again this morning talked about the community. So there's a number of solutions out there that also help you if you're in a particular supplier-based financial services, for example. There's a community in the UK, so that rather than all of you ask the supplier a slightly different set of questions, a lot of the questions you want to ask are common. So there's now communities out there, a lot of the suppliers. So once the supplier's been asked about its business continuity, its data protection and so on, it doesn't have to fill out the questionnaire again for DWP, cement manufacturer or whoever. It can say, well, I've got the set of answers here before you send me any more. So I think that's a good thing to be promoting. So in looking, are any of you going to be able to sleep tonight? I'm a little worried after this talk. Melatonin is available, by the way. I think it's quite good, or a beer. So I want to just leave you with 3 messages. If you haven't got the support of your senior management leadership to move forward a supply chain resilience program, I wouldn't bother to start, to be honest. Get the business case right and try and do it. I've spoken to many people over the 10 years who've said, yeah, I want to change things, but without their engagement, it's, you're fighting a losing cause, I think, eventually, particularly when you work across a function. So better to focus and get allies and get a business case together with the insurance manager, the procurement guy, because believe me, procurement should be very happy when you go and talk to them about risk, because they do want to move away from the binary. I've been to their latest annual conference, by the way. I'm still a fellow of the Institute. I hope they won't kick me out, please. Oh, we're being recorded. I'm in trouble now. No, that aside, but they will want some other measures of success. They need to justify their existence beyond cost saving, because cost saving, you run out of track eventually, don't you? There's only so many savings you can make. I hope I've also convinced you that maybe risk management, you need to think about the framework you're using. Is it broad enough for your section, and how do you prioritise it? And then I've hopefully given you some insight into the technology you might not have been aware of. And at that point, I shall gently lay down and put a cold towel on my head now. So was that useful? Do you have any questions? And as I say, I'm going to have a challenge. I'm going to pick out members of the audience here. I'm afraid it's not a holiday in Hawaii, but it's just to say one thing you're going to do differently after this talk. We have a question. Oh, do you? Yep. I'll have to do the running round, I think. There you go.
Thank you. One of the things I really struggle with for many years now is the extended supply chain, getting into the subcontractors. My previous employer, following some regulatory troubles in America, declared that we would follow the supply chain as far as it went. Right? And then a few years later, they're like, maybe we'll stop at fourth parties, because it was just too hard and brought on massive questions about liability down that supply chain. So just looking for some tips if you're going to go past the third party into fourth, fifth, sixth parties, like realistically, how can you make that work? and how much information should you or could you collect without starting to cloud liability?
Okay, well, I'll give some suggestions, and anybody else feel free to add to them. Firstly, try and make it a shared goal. So firstly, where are you going to prioritise? Because you're right, going down the multiplication factor, even looking at just 3 or 4 suppliers at tier 1 becomes massive as you go out to, they've got 5, the mathematics is a geometric progression, I think. So firstly, understand where you're going to prioritise and start that journey of improvement, where the CEO really wants to see the improvement, based perhaps on the risk you perceive lower down the tiers. So there's regulations that force you to do it and maybe help you, like conflict minerals, the California Slavery Act. So sometimes they can be on your side because the supplier might say, well, I'm not telling you about this. You can say, well, there's a regulation here that you're not complying with. It's a law. Do you know what I mean? You need to give me some visibility. Second to that, however, more positively, is to say to them, convince them in the way you communicate, which is right, this is a shared journey of improvement because they only make sales to you, if they're resilient and so on, to supply the end customer. It's, you're part of this chain. So wouldn't they be interested in making the chain whole? Do you know what I mean? Make it a shared mission rather than a tick box for them, and link that to say, which is obvious, the more they're being open and trustworthy for you, the trust word came up, the more likely they are to get more business from you. It's not guaranteed, but you know what I mean? If they're complying and their rival is not complying, then I think the business is going to gradually switch to the people who are going to comply. So that it's not a guaranteed area, but hopefully that's given you some tips. And then, as I say, there is software available now to capture this and share it across many parts of the organisation. Then I'll get into a half an hour of lecture on this, but then the next thing is looking at you can get through unstructured data, but that's more of a deep dive consultancy exercise. You've got to look at the cost of that because then you're probably involving a third party when you get to that stage. You know what I mean? To help you piece it together. Is that critical? Does that help to answer the question?
Like I said, so most just reinforces that it's a really gnarly problem.
Right. Anybody else? Any questions? Mike, you all right? Oh,
I'll throw another one your way. So a number of years ago, some folks were talking in financial services about, wouldn't it be fantastic if we could band together? So instead of all of us auditing all of our suppliers when we share so many, wouldn't it be grand if somebody performed these audits and we could all share the results, which I believe is a model that already exists in some other industries, particularly in energy.
Yep.
Just wondering if you are seeing any progress on that front, anyone kind of emerging that can help with that?
Well, certainly an old, I think I can call him an old friend of mine. He's both old and I've known him 20 years. Does that count, an old friend? He was one of the founders, already founders of a company called, I'm not here to promote anybody particularly, but Achilles. But now he moved on from Achilles, he sold out Achilles, but he now works for Joscar. I think that's what the name, well, Helios, and then the system for the financial services, I think it's called Joscar, but it's Helios. But that's, I think his only, we were trying to meet up for a coffee a few months ago and I haven't caught up with him, Colin Moyne. I think that's only for UK, but he has got together a number of the banks and insurance companies in the UK to do precisely what you've talked about, kind of mimicking his Achilles model that started in the oil industry in 1990, something like that. It goes a long way back, which is a very sensible idea right back then. That was one of the earliest demonstrations of it. So I think it's starting to happen, but there's more opportunity to do that. And yeah, we can talk offline if we can try to think of US or wherever you're based and what we can do. Is that answering that question? Okay. Okay, anything else? Are you going to change one thing when you leave here? My massive request, get engaged with supply chain resilience. I'm looking at Konstantinos, he looks very worried. You're going to sleep tonight. Can you give me one thing you might do differently? One thing you're going to pick up, be it read this report or whatever?
I think that the first thing I could do is to raise awareness in the business and in the procurement department to make sure
Okay.
assign
Sorry, yeah,
people.
sorry, yeah, you need the mic. That's my fault. Apologies.
When they assign business to third party. To me, all this information is quite condensed, so I need some time to digest.
Yeah, sorry, I may have given you too much there.
Preferably, if we can download your presentation and come back later with some questions or some
For
advice.
sure. Did I give you a business card? Yeah, I can give you a business card. Any of you want one? Yeah.
Great.
And I think the slides are being shared. I don't have a problem, or I'll send you the slides anyway if you want them.
Thank you.
Yeah, I apologise. Yeah, there's a lot there to take in 50 minutes or whatever it is. Anybody else want to volunteer? They're going to do anything different? Do you want to? Yeah. I'll get you the mic. Because you asked the most questions, so I'm afraid you've got to be picked on.
No, I thought that would get me off the hook. We've got Google Alerts baked into our GRC system, but I'd like to go investigate better solutions than just a simple Google Alerts.
Excellent. Talk to me later then, I'll tell you what's on the market. Okay, anybody else want to volunteer?
I'm going to ask you for that report.
Excellent. That's a good way out, yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time, Mike. Do you want to say anything? Or?
No, I was going to ask you about the reports as well.
Okay, well, that's cool, yeah. Just, I'll give you a card and then you can send me an email and I'll send you back the report, something like that. It's my cunning way of getting your contact details, by the way, guys. But I promise not to pester you too much, or at all, come to that. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.